Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 1366. The topic is mindset, and the title is What to Do When Your Best Days Are Behind You. That's pretty depressing, but I think it'd be a good topic to cover. We had a listener send in, actually in here, we joked a little bit. I already emailed them back and forth a little bit. I was going to say they sent in a question, but they didn't, and that was actually what the joke was. They sent me an email explaining their history and how they're struggling now with motivation, but actually nowhere in the email was a question, and I just thought it was kind of funny because I typically would answer, I don't know, it was just funny to me. It struck me as funny, and I, at the end of it, I said, emailed back to them, I said, I have an assumption of what you would like me to help you with, but there actually wasn't like any questions in there, and I'm not sure what you wanted. So we joked about it a little bit, but it got to the context of how, like, what can this person do now that their best days are behind them? So let's look at this point of view, then I'll explain kind of the answers that I gave. The listener played high school and college football. They said they were very good, but they had a big knee injury. They're pretty funny in their email, but they said it wasn't like they were going to make it in the NFL or anything, but they were really good, and they were super bummed they had a knee injury. They didn't get to play their senior year. They then got quickly into setting up a career, had family, a bunch of life stuff, and they find themselves now in their early 40s. They said they never addressed the knee injury beyond like just getting back to everyday life. So even though they were a football player, once they had the knee injury, they never got back to athletics. So the knee actually is still a huge issue for them. And they're struggling because he said he's never going to be as strong as he once was before, and he doesn't believe he'll ever have as much muscle mass and be as lean as he was when he used to play ball, and all he had to do all day was lift weights and eat food. You know, he said, a quote from what he wrote was, basically, I'm going back into lifting knowing that I'm only ever going to be maybe less pathetic, and that's the best I can achieve. Just not suck quite as bad. Now, that was sad. That was very sad. Also funny, but sad. So we were talking back and forth, and, when they were in college ball, like, they could, deadlift over 500 pounds. They squatted, who knows what the quality was, but they squatted over 400. And they said they just felt strong, lean, and mean, felt like a powerhouse. Then they got lost in life, and now they look back and they're, lost all their muscle, fat belly, bad knee. So they're just like super depressed. They want to get back into lifting because they find themselves at a kind of a longing for it in life, and the schedule has calmed down a little bit. Their kids are a little older. So he said he wants to get back into lifting, but he's struggling. He doesn't know how to train since he's not an athlete anymore. He also just knows that he's awful at everything. So he's like, what motivation in the world do I have if everything I'm doing feels horrible and is pathetic to what I used to do? And it's like, oh gosh, that's very sad. It also reminded me, there's a stand-up comedy that I really like by Kevin James, he's that guy from King of Queens, but he's very funny stand-up comedy. He has a stand-up comedy special, old one, called Sweat the Small Stuff. Really good if you ever want to check that out. And he said his fat loss goal was he wanted to be just lean enough so that way his belly didn't jiggle when he brushed his teeth. And I thought that was hysterical because that's kind of like what this listener is saying is, I'm not going to be amazing or anything anymore. I just want to be not as bad. So this is something I think a lot of people face eventually in their lifting career, is you might find yourself where, before you know it, you hit a level of performance and now all of a sudden you're like, you're not able to maintain that very well, or it's kind of off and on, or it's definitely behind you. So what do you do when you're kind of on the backside of a peak? Like in training, you train. Actually, I talked to my mom about this last night. My mom is, I think she's 64 years old, and we started lifting when she was 47. My mom is still getting stronger than she's ever been. So we've had some ups and downs here and there due to like life scheduling and craziness of, COVID and whatnot. But she's still pressing like 65-pound dumbbells, like 60-pound dumbbells, sorry. And like she's getting stronger and still improving. Whereas I started lifting weights when I was 16. So my mom has like almost 20 years. So 47 to 64, whatever the heck that math is. I think 17 years. So I started lifting when I was 16. I'm 38 now. So I've been lifting for 22 years. So I have a little bit of a longer kind of lifespan of lifting, and my earlier years were way more destructive to my body than what my mom's years have been, because I got to control everything after I learned on myself. I was basically the guinea pig for myself. So at 22 years into lifting now, I actually have kind of an older training age than my mom does. So it's kind of interesting, in the world of training, I would be kind of like the older one than we are outside of training, kind of a flip-flop. So I've struggled a little bit with this in my own kind of goals. Is when I was younger and lifting weights and going to college, sorry, mom and dad, but basically lifting weights was more important to me than college. So I got good grades, and thankfully I learned some things and got some good degrees and stuff. But I really prioritized like my training. I wanted to eat as perfect as I could, train all the time, and it was my kind of main focus. And then as I opened a business, I realized, okay, crap, I need to, spend some effort on maintaining and growing the business. So I had to kind of allocate a little less effort towards my food and my training. It was still very important to me. It just didn't get as much of a percentage of my 100% every day. That makes sense. Then I got married, and I love being married. I love my wife a lot. And that's another thing that you want to give your best to. So I want to give my best to my wife. I want to give my best to my business. I want to give best to my training and stuff. I do prioritize my marriage as equal as I do my own self, in the sense that, I would love to say, because it sounds good to say, that I prioritize my wife above myself, but that wouldn't even be fair to her, because if I'm, constantly draining myself and I don't have anything good to give, that's not being fair to her by always being burned out and worn out and stressed and tired and miserable myself. I'm not going to give her the best of myself. So I prioritize ourselves equally. So that way I give to her when the time is right, but I also do take care of myself, so that way I can continue to give to her as best as I can. And then the business comes second. So I've had to decide, what are my priorities, what gets my percentages, and through all that process, my training is still very important to me, but it does get a lower and lower percentage of me. So I have been able to adjust my expectations along the way. Now, not everybody kind of does that for themselves. People will have a family, they'll have a full-time career, they'll have a bunch of other stuff going on in their life, but they'll still expect the same level of adherence to their nutrition, or adherence to their training, or the outcome of their nutrition and training, regardless of those things. Like if they were everything should be 100%. It's like, well, you can't give 100% to everything. You only have 100% as a total amount that you can give, so you have to divide that up. I can't give 100% to my training, 100% to my family, 100% to my career. I don't have 3 100%. So it doesn't work that way. Now, I can improve what my 100% could do, and that's definitely what I keep doing all the time. But we have to be willing to adjust our expectations of both adherence, how well I'm adhering to my kind of nutrition and training, as well as my desired outcome, if I'm giving lower and lower percentage to it. So if I have to, disperse myself amongst, family, career, all these other things, maybe there's a new stressor in life, in this season of life, maybe you have a child who's, playing summer ball, and all of a sudden you're traveling every single weekend, and there's craziness there. But we have to be willing to lower, and I don't like saying that word, but it is, it's a good descriptor of it, is, okay, I want to do as best as I can within what I can control. If I can control less right now, I have to understand that I'm going to do a little bit less at doing my best in regards to being controlled. So if I would normally eat chicken and rice, every day for lunch, but all of a sudden I got to travel and do all these other things, maybe stopping in at, Chipotle and getting a chicken and rice burrito, it might not be as perfectly clean as I used to eat, but damn, that's a lot better than missing a meal, so sometimes we have to make those adjustments. And that's essentially what him and I, the listener, and I were talking about is, what do you do when your best days are behind you? Well, redefine what you consider to be the target. So he had mentioned, I'm never going to be able to deadlift more than I used to. And my response was, well, do you want to? Is deadlifting more than you used to going to help you go to where you want to go? I said, where do you want to be in 10 years? Like at 50 years old, do you want to be, bad knees, bad mobility, overweight, but you can deadlift over 500 again? Is deadlifting over 500 again really going to get you where you want to be? Maybe instead of deadlifting 500, instead of strength being a thing you look at, why not fix that knee? Why not make sure that your knee can be healthy so that way if you're having trouble at 40 with your knee, man, wait till you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s. You don't want that knee getting worse and worse and worse. So maybe right now, instead of looking at strength, maybe we want to look at something else. Same thing with muscle mass. He mentioned, I want to get back to where I was muscle-wise, but I'm never going to do that. It's like, well, do you really want to do that? Does that lead you to where you want to be? So there's ways where we can still focus on strength and muscle mass. So strength, for example, if you want to focus on strength, even if you're a little bit older, is go look at the powerlifting competitions, if that's a strength goal for you. Look and see what the records are, state records are for your age and weight class. Stop comparing yourself to a bunch of 20-year-olds or what you see on Instagram. Go check out the state records. If you're, on TRT, maybe you have to look at the untested federations. If you're natural, you don't have to have any hormone replacement or anything. If you're still natural kind of levels of hormones, you can go look at the drug-tested federations and divisions. But look at your age and your weight. Compare yourself to, see what the state records are. Look at things that are more in context. Stop looking at Instagram. Stop looking at a bunch of 20-year-olds. Look at other people who also balance a career and family. What do they do? Muscle mass. Go to a local bodybuilding show. If you're 40 plus, see what the 40 plus athletes look like. You can find it on YouTube if you want, but it is fun to kind of go see it in person. But we might have to also just kind of consider new goals, like I said, to that person was maybe instead of focusing on deadlifting, the max effort we ever can, maybe I want to try to do, a certain weight for reps. So instead of going for 500-pound deadlift, maybe I can see if I can deadlift 315 for 10. If you've never done that, that might be a fun goal. You can also work on mobility. Maybe there's some mobility skills that you'd like to do, or body weight training. Can you do a pistol squat? That might be a cool thing to go for that you never would have thought of going for before. Maybe try to do a muscle up. Doing some plyometrics if you have healthy knees, not necessarily the listener. But there might be new goals that we want to set. And there might be better context to old goals, such as strength and muscle tissue. Then there's other factors to consider, like what can I achieve with a family and full-time job? You've never done that. So maybe you have squatted, 315, but have you ever squatted 315 while working 40 plus hours and having a family? Probably not, right? So pretty much anything you squat right now is a PR because this is the most you've ever squatted with a family and a full-time job. So put it in context. Consider other factors. And look at where you want to go. Where do you want to be in 10 years? If you're in your 30s looking at your 40s, if you're in your 40s looking at your 50s, and if you're 50s and your 60s, do the old goals that you used to have, the things that you used to do, would they lead you to where you want to be? As I said with the listener, if he has a bad knee, instead of worrying about deadlifting 500 pounds, fix that knee. That's going to get you a hell of a lot more benefit than deadlifting 500 pounds would. Now, maybe you can have a goal of deadlifting something, and maybe that does motivate you. So if you're in your early 40s, maybe if you used to deadlift 500 pounds in college, and now you'd struggle with 315, maybe by the time you're 45, you could deadlift 405. like 405 pounds. Then maybe by the time you're 50, maybe you can deadlift 500 pounds. I've helped some people do that. One of my earlier clients I used to work with back when the gym first started, he had a back injury in his early 20s. He didn't really lift weights or exercise or work out or anything until his mid-40s. I think I met him at like 46 or 47, and he said, he's tired of feeling fat. Basically, it was just funny. He walked into the gym and he said, "I'm fat and weak. Can you help me?" And I was like, "Oh my God!" So I was like, "It's okay, man." So I helped him, and he actually deadlifted 500 pounds at 50 years old. So we worked to address what the back issues were, strengthen his core, strengthen his hips, his glutes, a whole bunch of things. And he deadlifted 500 at 50 years old. So that was pretty badass. And he did it while losing a bunch of body fat. So you can do some pretty cool kick-ass things. We just have to kind of put everything in context, and we have to make sure that it's going in the direction that we want to go. So where do you want to be in 10 years, and what can you do today to help you get there? Setting short-term goals is extremely helpful. That's going to help a lot. And we do have a past podcast that would be fun to check out. Podcast 124. It's a mindset podcast titled Setting Smart Goals. The SMART is an acronym for aspects that a goal should have if you want to have them be kind of like the best goals you can set for yourself and have them be achievable. So that's a good podcast. Check out podcast 124, Mindset, title Setting Smart Goals. Check that out. But you would set short-term goals. You try to achieve those, achieve them and evaluate your direction and analyze what you want to do next, maybe every 3 to 6 months. And look into factors other than just training. So maybe when you were in your 20s, you ate like a 20-year-old, pizza and beer. So now maybe you can maximize food quality and timing and make sure you're consistent with your calories and your protein. You can also work on sleep. Maybe you just kind of haphazardly slept when you were younger, but now all of a sudden you can be more regimented with sleep. And you can focus on lifting technique. So all of a sudden, you might have some factors against you, such as like being a little bit older, but you can have much better food, much better sleep, much better technique. And all of a sudden now, you might be able to out-achieve what you did when you were younger. So one of the things to do is to stop looking behind you. So when we say, what do you do when your best days are behind you? Stop looking behind you. Don't look at what you did do. Look at what you want to do in the future. Maybe what you did do before wouldn't lead you to your best life if you were to start to work on that again. Where do you want to be in 10 years? So stop looking at what you did do. Look at where you want to be. What do you want to do in your future? And then look at the steps you can take today to get there. So as I said, if you're in your early 40s, maybe you used to deadlift over 500 in college, and now you struggle with 315, which is what the listener said. Well, maybe by 45, if you work on your knee, lose a little bit of pounds, maybe you might actually be able to deadlift 405 pounds by the time you're 45. That's kind of cool. That sounds good. Then from 45 to 50, keep working at the knee, keep losing body fat, keep strengthening the individual aspects of whatever's holding you back in deadlift strength and technique work. Then maybe you can deadlift 500 by 50 years old while having a family and a full-time job. So yeah, you've deadlifted 500 before, but you've never done it at 50, and you've never done it with a family, you've never done it with a full-time job. How freaking kick-ass and fun would that be? So look at where you are now. Look at where you want to go. That's kind of the best perspective we can have. Stop looking behind you. There's still so much more ahead of you. So much more. So you can take the lessons you've learned from where you've come from over the years. Keep those. But let's set some new goals. Let's look at where you want to go, where you want to be. Let's set some small short-term goals there, and let's do it. So there are still great things ahead. They're just different things. And that's okay because you have a different life now with different goals. So match your mind to where you are now and where you want to be. set some new goals that will lead you in the direction of where you want to be in 10, 15, 20 years. Okay? Now, if you're just starting all this stuff, podcast 1232 is a nutrition podcast titled Start Here. It'll tell you where to start with your nutrition. As for training, there's like 40 billion things you can do for training aspects, and it kind of depends on where you're coming from with your past history. Just if you have any questions, just email me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. Tell me what your lifting history is. Tell me some goals you have, and I'll give you some suggestions. We do have free programming ourselves at podcast 1205. I believe is our free programming podcast, so you check that out. And then there's also just other podcasts we have of different structures. So if you let me know your story, I can give you a little bit of help. Our email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. So if you think that your best days are behind you, they're not. There's still so many more cool, awesome, fun, amazing things you can do. Just look at where you want to be, how you can get there from where you are today. You can crush this. It's a new you, new lease on life, new moment. Let's crush this. Let's go for it, okay? Email me if you need anything. If you like today's podcast or a podcast in general, please share the podcast. You can do so by sharing a link on social media. That's the best way to reach the most amount of people. Or you can even just share it in a conversation with a friend. As long as people know about the podcast, we can help them with the podcast. So that's the goal. Thank you to the patrons of the podcast, the people who financially support the podcast, which you can now do on our website. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year. I give an hour to it every single day. We try to keep it every single day in terms of like frequency, and we want to keep it for free. So thank you to those who support us. And again, we have our option now on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. You can do a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation, however you do it. I appreciate that you do it. Just helps keep this somewhat reasonable. So basically, I just want to lose less money doing it. I'm happy to do it, and I'm going to keep doing it, but it does help getting the financial support. So thank you very, very much. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.